A group of cartel enforcers laughed as they reduced a veteran's tractor to ashes. But they had no idea they had just ignited the wrath of a man trained to end wars, one who was once the deadliest Delta Force commander. The early morning sun cast a golden hue over the vast fields of rural Texas. The rhythmic hum of a tractor echoed through the stillness as Gabriel Torres maneuvered it across his land. His hands, calloused from years of farming, held the steering wheel with ease, but his sharp, unwavering eyes scanned the horizon with the precision of someone who had seen too much of the world's darkness. To his neighbors, Gabriel was just a quiet man who preferred the company of his cattle to that of people. To the world, he was invisible, and he liked it that way. Every day, Gabriel followed the same routine, tending to his crops, repairing fences, and enjoying the solitude that his farm provided. The only sounds that broke the quiet were the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional chirping of birds. For most people, the simplicity of this life might seem dull, but for Gabriel, it was peace, a sharp contrast to the chaos he had once known. The farmhouse itself was modest, with chipped paint and a creaky front porch. Inside, however, there were reminders of a life long buried. In a locked chest tucked away in the attic were medals, faded photographs, and a knife engraved with the words, "Delta Force, first in, last out." Gabriel rarely opened that chest. It was a relic of a past he tried to forget, a past where he was not just a soldier, but a living weapon. Gabriel's hands trembled slightly as he wiped the sweat from his brow, memories of missions gone by flashing uninvited in his mind. The tension in his jaw loosened when he looked out at his land, reminding himself that he had left that life behind. But peace, he knew, was fragile. The first sign of trouble came as Gabriel was unloading supplies from his truck. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose along the dirt road leading to his farm. Trucks, big and loud, roared closer. Gabriel's instincts kicked in before his mind could catch up. He straightened, his sharp eyes narrowing as he scanned the vehicles. Approaching. 3 black pickup trucks came to a screeching halt near the entrance of his property. The men who stepped out looked like trouble, rough, armed, and radiating arrogance. They were members of the Cruz Cartel, a name that sent shivers down the spines of every rancher in the region. Their leader, Miguel Cruz, had a reputation for crushing anyone who dared defy him. Gabriel leaned against his truck, his expression calm but his mind calculating. The man in charge stepped forward, a wiry figure with snake-like eyes and a smirk that oozed overconfidence. "You must be the quiet farmer everyone talks about," the man sneered. "I am Luis, and I am here on behalf of Señor Cruz. He likes your land. Think of this as your eviction notice." Gabriel said nothing. His silence seemed to irritate Luis, who waved his hand dismissively at the other men. "Burn it," he barked. The men laughed as they grabbed torches and gasoline from their trucks. Gabriel watched, still silent, as the flames began to lick the side of his tractor. His jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists, but he remained still, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside. Luis walked closer, leaning into Gabriel's space with a smug grin. "This is just a warning. Next time, it will not be your tractor, it will be your house." Gabriel met Luis's gaze, his voice cold and steady. "You should leave." Luis barked a laugh. "Or what, old man? What are you going to do?" Gabriel did not answer. He just watched as the men climbed back into their trucks and sped off, leaving the burning wreckage behind. The flames reflected in his eyes as he turned and walked back to his house, his steps slow but purposeful. In his mind, a switch had flipped. He had spent years running from his past, but now it seemed that his past had found him. Inside the farmhouse, Gabriel stood in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the chest in the attic. His heart pounded as he pulled down the ladder, each creak of the wood echoing through the silence. When he opened the chest, the memories came rushing back. The medals, the dog tags, the photographs of his old team, all reminders of the man he used to be. But it was not the past he sought. It was the tools. Gabriel's hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times before. A disassembled rifle lay hidden beneath the medals. His fingers danced over the pieces, putting it together in seconds. Beside it was a combat knife, its edge as sharp as the day it was issued. Gabriel's reflection in the blade was not the quiet farmer. It was the deadly Delta Force commander. As he strapped on his gear, Gabriel's mind was no longer on crops or cattle. It was calculating tactics, analyzing weaknesses, and preparing for war. The Cruz cartel thought they had burned his spirit when they torched his tractor. What they had really done was awaken the man he had tried so hard to leave behind. Gabriel spent the night preparing. The remains of his tractor still smoldered outside, but his focus was elsewhere. His mind, sharpened by years of training, was piecing together a strategy. He knew the Cruz cartel would return. Men like them never left unfinished business, especially not when their egos were bruised. Gabriel had seen it before, small-time criminals, puffed up by power, thinking they were untouchable. They had no idea who they had provoked. In the barn, Gabriel worked methodically. He reinforced weak points, turned tools into makeshift weapons, and mapped out every entry point to his land. The barn itself became a fortress. Sharp spikes hidden beneath hay bales, ropes rigged to trigger traps, and barrels of water set up. To extinguish fires, every step he took was precise, every action calculated. Gabriel was not just preparing for a fight, he was turning the entire farm into a battlefield. As the hours passed, his calm determination began to transform into something more. He thought about the Cruz cartel, how they had terrorized innocent people, destroyed livelihoods, and now come for him. He could not allow them to continue. His quiet life had been disrupted, but he knew there was a greater purpose in this fight. It was not just about his farm. It was about sending a message. At dawn, Gabriel stood at the edge of his property, scanning the horizon. The air was still, the only sound the distant call of birds. But then, in the distance, the rumble of engines broke the silence. The cartel was coming back, just as he had expected. This time they had brought more men. 4 trucks roared onto his property, kicking up dust as they skidded to a stop. Gabriel watched as nearly a dozen armed men poured out, each one carrying rifles and machetes. At the front of the group was Luis, the same man who had burned his tractor. But this time, he was not laughing. Beside him stood another man, a larger, more intimidating figure. Miguel Cruz, the leader of the cartel. Miguel's reputation preceded him. He was known for being ruthless, a man who eliminated threats without hesitation. He surveyed the farm with cold, calculating eyes before stepping forward. "So this is the man who dared to defy me," Miguel said, his voice low and menacing. "You made a mistake, old man. Now you will pay." Gabriel did not flinch. His expression remained calm as he replied, "The mistake was yours. Coming back here," Miguel smirked, gesturing to his men. "Take him. Burn everything." The cartel spread out, moving towards the barn and the farmhouse. Gabriel stepped back, into the shadows, his heart steady. He had faced worse odds before, and he was ready. As the first group of men approached the barn, Gabriel's traps began to spring. A hidden tripwire sent one man sprawling into a pit of sharp spikes. Another trap released a heavy log, swinging down to knock 2 men off their feet. The screams echoed through the still air, and chaos erupted. "Watch where you step!" Miguel barked, his frustration growing. "Find him!" Gabriel moved like a ghost, slipping between the shadows of the trees and the barn. He picked off the cartel members one by one, using his rifle with deadly precision. A single shot, and another man fell. The cartel fired blindly into the trees, unable to pinpoint where the shots were coming from. Luis, furious, shouted, "Come out and face us, coward!" Gabriel's voice rang out from the darkness. "You are on my land now. This is my fight, my rules." The cartel regrouped, their frustration turning to fear. Miguel, however, was not deterred. He ordered his men to light the barn on fire, hoping to flush Gabriel out. The flames roared to life, but Gabriel had anticipated this. Barrels of water rigged with a simple pulley system doused the flames before they could spread. "Is that all you have?" Gabriel taunted, his voice calm yet cutting. "You came here thinking I was weak. You were wrong." Miguel clenched his fists, his cold demeanor cracking. "Enough games. Find him and end this." The remaining cartel members began sweeping the property, moving cautiously now. But Gabriel was always one step ahead. He used the terrain to his advantage, luring them into traps and ambushes. One by one they fell, until only Miguel and Luis remained. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Gabriel stepped out from the shadows, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He stood tall, his presence commanding. Miguel and Luis turned to face him, their arrogance replaced by unease. "This ends now," Gabriel said, his voice steady. Luis, desperate, raised his weapon, but Gabriel was faster. A single shot rang out, and Luis collapsed to the ground. Miguel stood frozen, his hand hovering near his pistol. "You think you are some kind of hero?" Miguel sneered. "You cannot stop us. Another will take my place." Gabriel stepped closer, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Not today." Before Miguel could react, Gabriel disarmed him with a swift, practiced motion. Miguel stumbled back, his confidence shattered. For the first time, the cartel leader looked vulnerable. Gabriel did not kill him. Instead, he forced Miguel to his knees, tying his hands and leaving him at the center of the property. "You will answer for what you have done," Gabriel said, his voice low. "Justice is coming." As dawn broke over the farm, Gabriel surveyed the damage. The barn was scorched, the tractor destroyed, but the land was still his. And for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. The Cruz cartel had been dismantled, their leader delivered to the authorities. The community, once living in fear, could now breathe freely. Gabriel stood at the edge of his property, watching as the sun rose over the fields. He knew the fight was not over. There would always be others like the cartel. But for now, he had won, and that was enough. The sky was a canvas of burning orange as the last remnants of daylight disappeared, leaving Gabriel's farm bathed in shadows. The once quiet land was now littered with the aftermath of battle. Traps sprung, bodies scattered, and the scent of smoke lingering in the air. Gabriel stood in the open, rifle in hand, his calm demeanor hiding the storm brewing within. Across from him, Miguel Cruz, the feared cartel leader, gritted his teeth, his confidence waning as his men lay defeated. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," Miguel growled, his hand twitching near his holstered pistol. Gabriel tilted, his head slightly, his piercing gaze locked on Miguel. "You are wrong. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, a coward who hides behind men he orders to die for him." Miguel's composure cracked, and he pulled his pistol in a flash. Gabriel moved faster. A single shot from his rifle struck Miguel's hand, sending the pistol clattering to the ground. Miguel howled in pain, clutching his injured hand, but his eyes burned with defiance. "You think this ends with me?" Miguel spat, his voice filled with venom. "There will always be more." Gabriel approached slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. "I am not just ending you. I am ending the fear you spread. Your men are gone. Your empire is crumbling. What do you have left?" Miguel glanced around, his bravado fading as reality set in. The men he had trusted to enforce his reign of terror were no longer standing. The traps, the precision shots, the calculated tactics. Gabriel had dismantled everything Miguel had built piece by piece. Miguel lunged suddenly, grabbing a knife from his boot and slashing wildly. Gabriel stepped back, narrowly avoiding the blade. The veteran's instincts took over, and in one fluid motion he disarmed Miguel, twisting the knife from his grip and tossing it to the ground. Miguel stumbled, breathing heavily, his chest heaving with a mix of anger and fear. "You think you are better than me?" Miguel hissed. "You are just like me? Another killer." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "The difference is, I fight to protect. You fight to destroy." With a swift motion, Gabriel struck Miguel in the chest with the butt of his rifle, sending him crashing to the ground. Miguel groaned, his body racked with pain as Gabriel stood over him. "You have a choice," Gabriel said, his voice steady. "Leave this place and never return, or stay and face the consequences." Miguel glared up at him, defiance still flickering in his eyes. But the fire was dim, replaced by the realization that he was utterly defeated. He staggered to his feet, clutching his side, and spat on the ground. "This is not over." Gabriel watched silently as Miguel limped toward one of the abandoned trucks. The cartel leader climbed inside and started the engine, disappearing down the dirt road into the night. Gabriel knew Miguel's defeat would send shockwaves through the cartel's ranks, dismantling their influence in the region. The battle was over, but the war against men like Miguel was never truly finished. The next morning, Gabriel stood at the edge of his property, surveying the damage. His barn bore scorch marks, and the remnants of his tractor were a twisted heap of metal. But the land itself stood untouched, a testament to his determination. The farmhouse remained intact, its walls a symbol of resilience against the storm. Gabriel spent hours cleaning up the battlefield, collecting the traps and burying the remnants of the fight. His mind was calm, the adrenaline that had fueled him the night before replaced by a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had fought, not just for himself, but for the community that had lived in fear of the cartel's wrath. Later that day, a convoy of vehicles arrived, local law enforcement, accompanied by members of a federal task force. Gabriel greeted them with his usual calm demeanor, explaining the events of the night. The officers listened in awe, their respect for the quiet farmer growing as they pieced together what had happened. "Gabriel Torres," one of the federal agents said, flipping through a file. "Delta Force Commander, Medal of Honor recipient. I have to say, you are a legend." Gabriel gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "I'm just a man protecting what is his." The agents took Miguel Cruz's remaining men into custody, loading them into vehicles to face justice. Word of Gabriel's stand spread quickly, and soon the entire town knew of his bravery. Neighbors who had once seen him as a quiet recluse now looked at him with newfound admiration. As the sun set over the fields, Gabriel sat on the porch of his farmhouse, watching the horizon. He knew the cartel would not return, at least not any time soon. His message had been clear. This land, this life was worth fighting for, and he was not a man to be underestimated. Gabriel reached for the chest he had left by his feet. Inside were the remnants of his past, a past he had long tried to bury. But now, as he looked at the medals and photographs, he felt a sense of pride. He was not just a farmer. He was a protector, a fighter, and a man who would stand against any threat. The sound of crickets filled the air as Gabriel leaned back in his chair, his rifle resting against the wall beside him. The battle was over, but his vigilance remained. For as long as he lived, Gabriel Torres would ensure that no one, no cartel, no gang, would ever take what he loved away from him again. The calmness of the morning felt surreal. The scars from the previous night's battle were evident, but Gabriel's farm stood tall, a symbol of resilience against the storm that had tried to consume it. The fields, though partially scorched, shimmered in the sunlight, and the quiet breeze carried with it a sense of closure. Gabriel walked through his property, his steps slow but deliberate. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, a reminder of the man he once was and the protector he had become. Word of Gabriel's confrontation with the Cruz cartel spread like wildfire through the small Texan town. The locals, who had lived under the cartel's shadow for years, began to emerge from their fear. They gathered outside Gabriel's property, hesitant but curious, wanting to meet the man who had stood up against the ruthless gang. Sheriff Daniels, a man who had long been powerless against the cartel's influence, arrived at the farm just as Gabriel was finishing his repairs to the barn. He stepped out of his patrol car, tipping his hat with a look of admiration. "You know, Gabriel," the sheriff began, "I always knew there was more to you than just a quiet farmer, but I never imagined this." Gabriel gave a small smile, wiping his hands on a rag. "I never wanted this, Sheriff. I just wanted peace." Daniels nodded, glancing at the repaired traps scattered across the property. "Well, you gave this town something more than peace. You gave us hope." Gabriel shrugged. "Hope is fragile. The cartel might not return, but there will always be others." The sheriff leaned closer, his voice dropping. "That may be true, but for now you've shown them and everyone else that we're not to be underestimated." Over the next few days, Gabriel focused on rebuilding what had been damaged. Neighbors showed up to help, offering tools, supplies, and support. For years, Gabriel had kept to himself, avoiding the connections that now seemed to pour in. But this time, he accepted their help, realizing that strength did not come from solitude, it came from unity. Children whispered stories about the farmer who fought the cartel, their eyes wide with awe as they pointed to Gabriel's property. To them, he was a hero, a legend who had stood against evil and won. Gabriel, however, did not see himself that way. He had done what needed to be done, nothing more. As he repaired his fences and tended to his surviving crops, he thought about the chest in his attic. For years it had been a symbol of the life he wanted to forget, but now it felt like a part of him, a part that had never truly left. He realized that he could not run from his past. Instead, he had to embrace it. One evening, as Gabriel sat on his porch, a truck pulled up the driveway. A man stepped out, wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase. Gabriel recognized the look immediately. Government or something close to it. "Gabriel Torres," the man asked, extending a hand. Gabriel shook it, his expression guarded. "Depends on who is asking." The man smiled faintly. "You can call me Mr. Reyes. I represent a special task force focused on dismantling criminal networks like the Cruz Cartel. What you did here, it sent shockwaves through the cartel's operations. Their leadership is in chaos. We could use someone like you." Gabriel's brow furrowed. "I have spent my life fighting battles for others. I came here to get away from all that." Reyes nodded, his tone understanding. "I know, but you are a symbol now. People like you inspire others to stand up, to fight back. You may not want the responsibility, but it has found you." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, staring out at the horizon. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. "I will think about it." Reyes left shortly after, but his words lingered. Gabriel knew that his life would never be the same. The quiet existence he had tried so hard to build had been shattered, but in its place something stronger had emerged, a purpose, a reason to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for those who could not fight for themselves. Weeks passed, and the farm began to thrive again. The fields were replanted, the barn repaired, and the faint scars of the battle slowly faded. But the stories of what had happened spread far and wide. Gabriel's name became a beacon, whispered among those who lived under the shadow of fear. He was the farmer who had faced the cartel and won. One day, a young boy from the town approached Gabriel as he worked on his land. The boy, no older than 10, held a worn notebook in his hands. "Mr. Torres," the boy said timidly, "is it true? Are you really a hero?" Gabriel paused, looking down at the boy with a soft smile. "A hero? No, son. I am just a man who refused to give up. The boy nodded, his eyes shining with admiration. "I want to be like you someday." Gabriel ruffled the boy's hair gently. "Then remember this, strength does not come from fighting, it comes from protecting what matters most." As the sun set over the farm, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Gabriel stood at the edge of his fields. The world around him was quiet once more, but the stillness was no longer a burden. It was a reminder of what he had fought for, and what he would continue to protect. With the rifle resting against his shoulder and the weight of his past finally sitting lightly on his heart, Gabriel turned back toward his farmhouse. The battles of his life had shaped him, but they did not define him. What defined him was his choice to stand, to protect, and to never back down. And for Gabriel Torres, that was enough.